I still remember the exact sound, the clinking of a metal chain, echoing through our quiet suburban street. At first, I thought it was a dog leash, but when I got closer to my own porch, my heart exploded in my chest. My disabled daughter, Emma, was sitting on the cold wooden floor, her trembling hands gripping the railing, and a thick metal chain was locked around her waist. Her wheelchair had been tossed into the yard, like trash. Her cheeks were red from tears, and she kept whispering, "Daddy, please don't be mad. I didn't do anything." But the voice that shattered my soul came from behind me, Karen's shrill tone echoing from her porch. She was being disruptive. Someone had to teach her manners. She had no idea who she had just crossed, no idea that the father she just challenged was the police chief. When I scooped my daughter into my arms and felt her shaking against my chest, something inside me broke in a way I had never experienced before. Not as a father, not as a man, and certainly not as the police chief of this entire county. Emma has always been gentle, quiet, and painfully soft-spoken. Because of her disability, she moves slowly and speaks even slower. She has never, not once, caused trouble for anyone. Our neighbors know that. Our community knows that. Everyone knows that except the one woman who somehow inserts herself into every peaceful corner of this neighborhood. HOA Karen. As I held Emma close, her small hands gripping my shirt, I couldn't get her trembling words out of my head. "Daddy," she said, "I don't belong here." Those 6 words froze my blood. Emma has never lied, never exaggerated. And Karen, our self-appointed neighborhood rule enforcer, has watched us with cold, judgmental eyes since the day we moved in. But this, chaining a disabled child to her own porch, this wasn't just bullying. This was evil. But before I dive deeper into what really happened, let me speak directly to the amazing viewers watching this right now. Which city are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. I love seeing how far our community reaches across the country. And if you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button before we continue, because what unfolded in this neighborhood is something no father should ever have to witness. Now, let's start. I'm going to tell you exactly, step by step, how a quiet afternoon turned into the darkest moment of my life, and how a father's patience became a storm that nobody, not even Karen, could stop. It all began on a quiet Saturday afternoon, the kind of day where sunlight falls warm across the neighborhood and everything feels too peaceful to ever imagine danger lurking behind a front door. Emma had asked me if she could sit on the porch for a little while to draw, something she always did when she wanted fresh air without walking too much because of her condition, and I had agreed, making sure her wheelchair was locked safely beside her, her sketchbook on her lap, and her water bottle within reach before I went back inside to finish some paperwork for an upcoming departmental briefing. I was only gone for 20 minutes. 20 minutes. When I stepped back outside to check on her, expecting to see her smiling at me with her usual soft wave, what I found instead made my stomach twist so violently I thought I might pass out. Her wheelchair had been tossed into the front yard, lying sideways like someone had kicked out of their way. Her sketchbook pages were scattered across the grass, and Emma herself was sitting directly on the porch floor with her knees pulled tight to her chest, a thick, rusted metal chain wrapped around her waist and fastened to the porch railing like she was some kind of animal. For a few seconds, my brain couldn't even process what I was seeing because it was too unreal, too monstrous, too far from anything a sane adult would ever do to a child, especially a disabled one. She looked up at me with big, terrified eyes, her voice barely a whisper. "Daddy, please don't be upset. I didn't do anything wrong." And the way she said it, the way her lips quivered, broke something inside me so deeply it felt physical, like a snap across my ribs. I knelt down immediately, my hands trembling as I touched the cold metal chain and realized someone had used an actual padlock to secure it. Not a prank, not a loose rope, not a childish attempt at intimidation. This was intentional restraint. This was abuse. I fought the instinct to rip the railing apart with my bare hands and instead forced myself to breathe, to stay calm for Emma's sake, even though every instinct, every part of my training, every part of my identity as a father was screaming at me to find the person who did this and make them answer for it. As I worked to loosen the chain enough so Emma could breathe comfortably, her small fingers tugged at my sleeve, and she whispered, "It was Miss Karen," she said. "She said I was ruining the neighborhood view. She said kids like me should be controlled." My jaw clenched so hard I felt my teeth grind, and for a moment I had to look away, because the rage inside me was boiling so violently I was afraid Emma would see it and think it was directed at her. The idea that someone, an adult, a neighbor, a person with a functioning brain, would look at my child, my gentle, harmless little girl, and decide she didn't belong enough to be allowed to sit on her own porch, the cruelty of it hit me like a punch to the chest. As soon as I freed her from the chain, I picked her up, holding her against me as her whole body trembled with quiet sobs, and carried her inside. But before I stepped through our front door, a shadow moved across Karen's porch, and I heard that familiar condescending voice, sharp, shrill, dripping with entitlement, cut through the air. Maybe now she'll learn not to disrupt the neighborhood. Honestly, someone needed to teach her a lesson. For a second, the world fell silent around me, like all sound had been sucked out of the air, and all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Karen stood there with her arms crossed, wearing her HOA uniform like it made her some kind of authority, her lips curled in disgust, as if my daughter had personally offended her existence. Every memory of her petty complaints, about Emma's wheelchair cluttering the porch, about the ramp being an eyesore, about our wind chimes being too cheerful, all of it flashed through my mind, but none of those incidents came anywhere close to what she had just done. Chaining a disabled child, on my property, without permission, without humanity, without shame. She didn't even flinch when she saw me holding Emma, didn't apologize, didn't ask if she was hurt. She just tossed her hand dismissively and said, "You really should keep her quiet." She was humming, and it was annoying the neighbors. That was the moment it happened. The moment she lost every ounce of mercy or patience I could have possibly offered. She had no idea who I was underneath the plain t-shirt and jeans I wore that day. No idea that I wasn't just Emma's father. I was the police chief, the person responsible for upholding the law she had just violently broken. But before revealing anything, before letting the storm inside me strike, I tightened my hold on my daughter, turned around, and walked back inside without saying a word. Because this wasn't going to be handled with yelling. This wasn't going to be handled with neighbor drama. This was going to be handled with the full weight of the law. And Karen was about to learn. You don't chain a police chief's child. You don't chain a disabled little girl. You don't walk away from this. Inside the house, as I set Emma gently onto the couch and wrapped a blanket around her shivering shoulders, I watched her cling to her sketchbook like it was the only safe thing left in her world. Every stroke of fear on her face fueled a storm rising inside me, a storm so heavy it nearly choked the air in my lungs. I wanted to call every officer in the department that very second, storm across the street, and drag Karen off her porch in handcuffs, but Emma's tear-filled eyes kept pulling me back down to earth, reminding me that her safety and comfort had to come first. So I knelt beside her and softly asked what happened, even though I already knew. But hearing it from her own trembling voice felt like swallowing broken glass. She grabbed my chair. She pushed it. She said I was making her neighborhood look bad. Emma stammered, wiping her tears with the back of her hand like she didn't want to trouble me. She told me how Karen stormed over the moment she heard Emma humming to herself while drawing, how she yanked her wheelchair away and called her a public disturbance, how she grabbed a chain Karen already had ready, and forced her to sit down, ignoring Emma's whimpers, ignoring her disability, ignoring her humanity. She even told me how Karen laughed while locking the padlock, saying, "Let's see if your daddy teaches you to behave now." Every detail made my fists clench harder until my knuckles went white. As a father, I wanted to explode. As a police chief, I knew I had to move carefully. So I pulled out my phone, gently reassuring Emma that I would fix everything, and stepped into the kitchen where she couldn't hear what was about to happen. I called the station. My second-in-command, Lieutenant Harris, picked up immediately, sensing something in my tone he had never heard before. I didn't yell, I didn't rant. I simply told him, with a controlled rage that bordered on terrifying, I need a patrol unit at my address. Code 3. Child endangerment. Suspect is my neighbor. There was a pause on the other end, the kind of pause where someone realizes this isn't a drill. "Chief, are you?" "Just send them," I said. Within minutes, I heard the distant wail of sirens slicing through the calm afternoon air. But before they arrived, I knew I had to confront Karen. Not as the police chief, but as a father. So I stepped back outside, shutting the door quietly behind me, and walked across the driveway toward her porch. She stood there with her arms crossed, sipping iced tea, like she hadn't just committed a felony, like she was proud of what she'd done. "Back so soon," she smirked. "Did your little pet calm down?" That word, pet, hit me like a slap across the face. I stepped closer, the mask slipping from my expression. "You chained my daughter," I said, my voice low, steady, dangerous. "You touched her. You restrained her. You terrified her." Instead of remorse, she rolled her eyes. "Oh, calm down. Kids bounce back. And maybe now she'll learn not to sit outside, making noises like some broken toy. I'm tired of looking at her chair, tired of hearing her little hums. Your daughter ruins the atmosphere of this entire neighborhood." Her words ignited something inside me that no training could suppress. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Karen scoffed. "Yes, fixed a problem you never had the guts to control." And right at that moment, perfect timing, the two patrol cars pulled into the street, lights flashing red and blue across her pristine porch, illuminating the shock that finally flickered across her face. Officers stepped out quickly, moving with purpose. The neighbors peeked from their windows and porches, whispering to each other as they watched the scene unfold. Karen's eyes widened. What are they doing here?" she stammered. I turned toward the officers and gave a small nod. Lieutenant Harris approached, his voice crisp and formal. "Ma'am, we need to speak with you regarding a report of child endangerment." Karen pointed at me, outraged. You called the police? Over what?" "That brat needed discipline." Harris glanced at me, then back at her. "Ma'am, the child you restrained is the police chief's daughter." Her jaw dropped so fast it practically hit the porch. "CH Chief?" For the first time since I had known her, Karen's confidence shattered. She stumbled over her words. I didn't know. That shouldn't matter," Harris cut in sharply. "What you did is illegal regardless of who her father is." Karen tried to backpedal, claiming Emma had agreed, then claiming she was only joking, then blaming the neighborhood rules, then blaming me, then claiming my daughter pretended to be disabled. That last lie made every officer stiffen. Harris motioned for cuffs. "Ma'am, you are under arrest for child endangerment, unlawful restraint, assault on a disabled minor, and destruction of medical equipment." Karen's iced tea slipped from her hands, shattering across the porch. "You can't arrest me. I'm part of the HOA board." Harris didn't even blink. "Congratulations. You're now part of the criminal record system, too." As the officers turned her around, Karen screamed, cursed, threatened lawsuits, shouted about her rights, and tried to twist the situation into her victimhood. But no one was listening anymore. Not me, not the officers, not the neighbors who had finally seen the real monster behind her forced smiles and HOA rules. As they guided her toward the patrol car, she shouted, "This neighborhood will regret this. You'll regret this." But all I could think about was Emma, my sweet, fragile, innocent little girl waiting inside, scared and confused. I didn't regret a single thing. For the first time in years, justice wasn't just a concept. It was already in motion. The moment Karen was driven away in the back of the patrol car, the neighborhood shifted, like the entire street had been holding its breath for years and finally exhaled. But justice wasn't done yet, not even close, because the Real storm broke the moment the neighbors began stepping out of their houses, each one wearing a different expression: shock, guilt, fear, confusion, and in some cases shame. Mrs. Ramirez from next door approached first, wringing her hands as she whispered, "Chief, oh, God." I didn't know she would do something like that. I heard shouting earlier, but I thought it was just Karen complaining again. Her voice cracked, and she looked genuinely devastated. But in that moment, I didn't care about apologies. I cared about Emma, who was still inside, trying to process the trauma inflicted on her. Others gathered around too. Mr. Collins, the retired school principal, the Jenkins family who lived across from Karen, even teenagers from the corner house who usually avoided all neighbor drama. Some asked what happened. Some already knew. Some tried to defend themselves for not stepping in sooner. But then something unexpected happened. A neighbor I barely knew, a quiet older man named Victor, stepped forward and said in a low voice, "Chief, this isn't the first time she's done something like this." The crowd fell silent instantly. I stared at him, my chest tightening. "What do you mean?" He sighed, looking around before continuing. "She's always hated kids. Any kid. My grandson visited last month. She yelled at him for riding his bike on the sidewalk. The Harris twins? She threw their basketball into the dumpster because she said the sound irritated her. And last year he hesitated, eyes shifting to the ground. She tried to have the Hendersons fined because their disabled son used a mobility scooter outside." A ripple of disgust moved through the neighbors as they exchanged uneasy glances. The Hendersons had moved away shortly after that incident. "Did anyone report her?" I asked, my voice colder than I intended. Silence. Then Victor whispered, "We were afraid. She always bragged that she had connections in the HOA. She threatened everyone." Hearing this, hearing that my daughter wasn't her first victim, but simply the first one she had gone too far with, sent a bitter taste into my mouth. I had lived in this neighborhood thinking people were exaggerating when they talked about Karen's cruelty, imagining the usual petty HOA nonsense, not this level of targeted harassment. And for the first time, they were looking at me not as the police chief, but as a father whose child had been harmed because the adults around her had stayed silent out of fear. I didn't blame them entirely. Bullies like Karen thrive on intimidation. But this wasn't going to continue. Not under my watch. Not ever again. Before I could speak, the Jenkins woman stepped forward, holding something behind her back. I found this in my driveway earlier," she said, swallowing nervously as she handed it to me. It was a small padlock key. My breath caught. "Where did you find it?" "It was near my car tire. I thought it was my son's, but now I think she must have dropped it." I stared at the tiny key sitting in my palm, the key to the lock that had trapped my daughter. It felt heavier than metal. It felt like evidence, proof. And then Mrs. Ramirez said something that sent chills up my spine. "Chief, you know she has cameras all over her porch, right? She records everything. Maybe she recorded what she did to Emma." My head snapped up. If that was true, it meant we could catch her confessing. It meant we had undeniable proof. It meant she wouldn't just face arrest. She'd face prison. I took a slow breath, letting the possibility settle before I finally spoke to the group gathered around me. "Thank you, all of you. But listen closely, this doesn't end here. What Karen did today wasn't just wrong, it was criminal. And if any of you have seen or heard anything she's done in the past, now is the time to speak up. No more fear. No more silence." The neighbors exchanged looks, some uncertain, some emboldened, some finally ready to stand up after years of being pushed down. Then, one by one, they started sharing. Stories spilled out like water from a broken dam. The Millers admitted she stalked them with her phone camera whenever their autistic son played in the yard. The Jenkins teenagers said she threatened to call the police on them for standing on the sidewalk. Mr. Collins confessed she filed false noise, complaints against him for reading on his porch. Every story painted a picture of a woman who had used her HOA position like a weapon, targeting anyone she deemed unfit, disruptive, or not good enough for the neighborhood. But nothing compared to what she did to Emma. Nothing. As the neighbors continued sharing their experiences, something shifted inside me. Not rage this time, but resolve. For years, Karen had operated unchecked because no one in the community had a voice strong enough to stop her. But now the person she had harmed was my daughter. Now she had crossed a line she could never return from. And I wasn't going to let her hurt another child ever again. Suddenly, Lieutenant Harris returned, approaching me with a serious expression. "Chief," he said quietly, pulling me aside, "we checked Karen's porch. You're going to want to see what we found." My heartbeat quickened. "What is it?" Harris hesitated, lowering his voice even more. Footage. She recorded everything she did to Emma. And she was laughing, mocking her, calling her names. He paused, and it gets worse. My blood turned cold. How? Harris exhaled slowly. She sent copies of the footage to other HOA members, bragging about it. The neighborhood went silent at that moment, not because they heard Harris, but because the air felt different now, heavier, darker, as if the truth itself had seeped out. Without another word, I straightened my posture and looked at the neighbors gathered around me. For the first time, they saw the shift. For the first time, they saw the police chief rise behind the father. This isn't just about Emma anymore, I said, my voice steady but loaded with fire. This is about justice. When Lieutenant Harris told me about the footage, a chill spread down my spine, not the kind that comes from fear, but the kind that comes from a rage so deep it settles into your bones. Without wasting a second, I followed him across the street to Karen's house, where officers were already securing the scene and collecting evidence, her porch still echoing with the fading memory of her screams as she was taken away. The neighbors watched from their windows, but no one dared approach now. Not when the red and blue lights painted Karen's perfect white picket fence like a crime scene, not when the truth of what she had done was finally coming to light. As Harris led me up the porch steps, I could still see the indentation on the wooden railing where the padlock had scraped against it. I could see the scuff marks where she had kicked Emma's wheelchair aside. The air around that spot felt poisoned, stained by cruelty. Inside her house, the environment was unsettling, a place too neat, too controlled, too sterile, as if her personality extended into every corner with perfection masking rot. Officers had already located the security hub in her living room. A massive TV mounted on the wall, connected to multiple surveillance feeds covering every inch of her property. Harris grabbed the remote, cleared his throat, and pressed play. What appeared on the screen made my stomach twist. There was Emma, my sweet little girl, sitting on the porch with her sketchbook, humming softly, completely unaware of the danger walking toward her. Then Karen stepped into the frame, hands on her hips, face twisted into an expression of disgust, like she had just found something filthy on her property. She snatched Emma's wheelchair without warning, dragging it aside while my daughter reached out helplessly, whispering, "Please, please stop," but Karen didn't. Instead, she leaned down, grabbed Emma by the arm, forced her to sit on the floor, and produced the chain from behind a planter, meaning she had planned this, prepared for it, ready to teach a lesson to a disabled child. Watching her lock the chain around Emma's waist made my vision blur with fury, but it was what came after that truly burned itself into my memory. Karen stepping back, crossing her arms, and laughing, actually laughing, while Emma cried and begged softly, "Please don't lock me, please." Karen's voice echoed through the speakers, "Quiet. You're already annoying enough. This neighborhood does not need your disability on display." My fists clenched so hard my nails dug into my palms. Harris paused the video, giving me a moment to breathe, but I shook my head. "Keep playing," I demanded. The next clip showed Karen taking photos of Emma, photos she sent to the HOA group chat, accompanied by mocking captions. One message read, "Finally found a use for the porch." Another said, "Maybe now she'll stop whining outside." Several HOA members reacted with laughing emojis. My breath hitched. The cruelty wasn't isolated, it was encouraged. Harris pressed his lips into a thin line. "Chief, this goes deeper than one incident. We've identified multiple videos in her archives harassing kids, threatening neighbors, stalking families." He switched to another folder labeled Incident Logs, which she apparently kept as trophies. In one clip, Karen yelled at a 9-year-old boy for playing hopscotch. In another, she followed a teenager home because he was wearing baggy clothes. Each video was time-stamped, stored, organized like a museum of torment she proudly curated. My anger simmered into something quieter, colder, more focused. "She targeted anyone vulnerable," I whispered. "Anyone she thought she could dominate." Harris nodded, and she escalated when no one fought back. As the officers cataloged evidence, another discovery emerged, a stack of printed complaints on the dining table, all written by Karen, all filed against various neighbors for absurd reasons. Grass too green, laughter too loud. child too slow, wheelchair unsightly, family too friendly. But one complaint stood out. A formal letter she drafted, never submitted but clearly intended for the HOA board, arguing that disabled individuals should be restricted from using porches and front yards because they disrupt the aesthetic harmony. My jaw dropped. This wasn't petty hatred. This was ideology, a twisted, hateful belief system disguised as HOA enforcement. As I stared at the letter, Harris approached me carefully. "Chief, there's something else." He handed me a small USB drive. This was found in her desk. It contains voice recordings. He plugged it into her laptop and clicked the first file. Karen's voice filled the room again, this time calm, cold, calculating. "If that little girl sits outside again, I'll call CPS and claim her father is unfit. If she wants to be treated special, she can stay inside where she belongs. I'll handle this myself." She recorded herself planning the abuse. She recorded herself proud of it. The neighbors gathering outside started to form small groups, talking quietly among themselves, piecing together what they had seen and heard over the years. Some looked horrified, some ashamed, and some angry that they had let this go on for so long. Meanwhile, officers continued digging through Karen's files, finding HOA emails where she manipulated rules, lied about neighbors, and threatened fines for fabricated violations. She had built her own dictatorship inside the neighborhood, until she chose the wrong child to hurt. As the reality of her calculated cruelty sank deeper, Harris turned to me, his expression grim. "With this footage and these recordings, she won't just be charged, she'll be convicted. This is airtight." I exhaled slowly. Good. She deserves every second. But even then, something in me wouldn't settle. Justice through the system was one thing, but justice for Emma, justice for the years of quiet suffering Karen had inflicted on this community, felt much bigger. And I knew this wasn't just about throwing her in prison anymore. This was about exposing her, stopping her, protecting every vulnerable person she had targeted. I took one last look at the paused footage of Emma on the screen, scared, confused, alone, and something in me hardened. "We're not done," I said. "Not even close." Leaving Karen's house that evening felt like walking out of a battlefield, the kind where the smoke has cleared but the echo of destruction still hangs in the air. I stepped outside and watched as officers sealed the property with evidence markers and crime scene tape, while neighbors huddled together in tight clusters, whispering the same thing over and over. How could she do this? How did none of us stop her earlier? But I didn't have the luxury of processing their guilt or shock. My mind was focused solely on one thing, Emma. I crossed the street back toward my home with heavy steps, the kind that come from carrying too many emotions at once: rage, grief, protectiveness, determination. When I opened the front door, I found her curled up on the couch under her favorite blanket, holding her stuffed rabbit with one hand and her inhaler with the other. She looked up at me with those big, fragile eyes that always held more innocence than this world deserved. "Daddy, is she gone?" she whispered, her voice so tiny it barely filled the room. I knelt beside her and brushed the hair from her forehead. "She's gone for now, sweetheart, and she won't hurt you again." But even as I said it, I saw the fear lingering in her gaze, the kind of fear that doesn't disappear just because the danger has passed. Trauma doesn't understand justice. It understands moments, memories, scars. And Karen had left one deep inside her. So I held her hand for a long time, answering every question she asked with patience she deserved. Why did she do it? Was I bad? Did I make her mad? Should I not sit outside anymore? Each question stabbed me in a way no criminal ever had. I told her over and over, "You did nothing wrong. You are perfect. She was the problem, not you." She nodded, but I knew the truth. Children don't heal through words alone. They heal through safety, consistency, love, and time. And I would give her all of that. After tucking Emma in and making sure she fell asleep peacefully, I stepped into the hallway and found Lieutenant Harris waiting quietly by the door, holding a folder thick with evidence. "Chief," he said softly, "we've got enough to bury her. But there's something else." The way he said it made my shoulders tense. "What now?" "The HOA board is trying to protect her." My head snapped up. Protect her. Harris nodded reluctantly. We received a message from 3 members claiming that Karen was acting according to neighborhood standards and that your daughter was causing preventable visual and auditory disturbances. They're trying to turn this into a policy issue. I stared at him, stunned at the audacity. I thought we were dealing with one rotten woman. I didn't know the rot spread deeper. Are they serious? I asked, unable to hide my disgust. Dead serious, Harris replied. They said the arrest was an overreaction. One of them even implied you used your position unfairly. I felt something inside me ignite again, not explosive anger this time, but something far colder and more powerful. They want to play this game? I murmured, fine. Then they're about to learn how the law actually works. I grabbed the folder from Harris and flipped through the reports, photos, screenshots, recordings, timestamps. Every piece of evidence was solid, airtight, unbreakable. But if the HOA board wanted to challenge this, then this wasn't just about a criminal case anymore. This was about dismantling the entire toxic structure that allowed Karen to operate unchecked. And I was more than ready. Harris followed me into the kitchen where I began making calls, not frantic, not emotional, but precise, strategic, controlled. I contacted the district attorney, forwarded the video footage, scheduled an urgent meeting for the morning. I called the county disability advocate who had been trying for years to get ADA compliance enforced in HOA communities. I called a civil rights attorney I trusted, and then, finally, I made a call I hadn't expected to make that night, the local news station. I have something you need to see, I told the reporter, and it involves an HOA member abusing a disabled child. Harris looked at me, slightly startled. Going public, sir? Absolutely, I said. They tried to bury families for years. Now it's their turn to be exposed. As the night went on, more neighbors came to the door, some bringing letters they had saved from Karen, some bringing screenshots of threats she sent, some crying because they felt they failed Emma by staying silent. And for the first time since moving into this neighborhood, I saw unity instead of fear. People stepped forward with courage they hadn't realized they had. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was everyone's. Around midnight, after the last neighbor left, I stepped outside for some air. The street was quiet, lit only by porch lights and the remnants of police tape waving softly in the breeze. I looked at Karen's dark house across the street, the place where she had enforced her cruelty like a tyrant. Not anymore. A new kind of message was spreading across the neighborhood. No more fear, no more silence, no more bullying disguised as rules. And as I stood there, I made a silent promise to Emma, to every child she hurt, to every neighbor she terrorized. This community would never belong to someone like Karen again. Morning came with a heaviness that felt impossible to shake, the kind that settles in your chest after a night filled with too many thoughts and too little rest. But the moment I walked into the kitchen and saw Emma awake, sitting quietly at the table with her stuffed rabbit, offering me a small, brave smile, like she was trying to reassure me instead of the other way around, I knew I had to carry every ounce of strength for her. "Daddy, is today going to be okay?" she asked softly, her voice still fragile from the trauma. I squeezed her hand. "Today will be better. I promise." But promises weren't enough, not today. After dropping her off at my sister's house where she would be safe, protected, and surrounded by love, I drove straight to the district attorney's office with Harris and our evidence. The DA, a sharp-minded woman who didn't tolerate injustice, watched the footage with her jaw tightening further with every passing second. When the video ended, she turned to me with a fire in her eyes I hadn't seen before. "We're filing charges immediately," she said. "Every charge applicable. Child endangerment, unlawful restraint, assault, hate-motivated intimidation." And given her position on the HOA board, we're adding abuse of authority. This case will make statewide news. She wasn't wrong. By the time we left her office, word had already spread across the county. The news station I contacted the night before had assembled a crew outside Karen's house, interviewing neighbors who had finally found their voice. People came forward with testimonies, screenshots, letters. years of evidence showing her reign of cruelty. But what shocked everyone most wasn't her behavior. It was how deeply rooted her influence was within the HOA board. Reporters discovered discriminatory emails, targeted harassment patterns, and bylaws manipulated to punish families Karen personally disliked. The HOA board tried to defend themselves, calling the incident a misunderstanding, but the community wasn't buying it anymore. They'd been silent too long, afraid too long, controlled too long. This time, they stood behind the truth. And the truth was impossible to ignore. By noon, the county courthouse was filled with residents demanding accountability, their voices echoing through the halls as Karen was escorted in wearing handcuffs, her once arrogant posture completely gone. She looked smaller, weaker, exposed, like someone who had spent her entire life hiding behind power and was now forced to stand without it. I watched from the back of the courtroom as she faced the judge for her initial hearing. When the prosecutor detailed the charges, Karen's face drained of color, her hands trembling as if she finally realized the gravity of what she'd done. But the moment that truly shifted the room came when the judge asked if she had anything to say. Karen opened her mouth, but no excuses came. No snark, no denial, no superiority. Instead, she stuttered, I didn't mean, but the judge cut her off coldly. You chained a disabled child to a porch. You mocked her disability. You bragged about it. This court has no sympathy for you. Gasps rippled across the room. Harris leaned toward me and whispered, she's done. And she was. The judge denied her bail. Reporters immediately rushed to broadcast the ruling. Across the county, across the state, people were hearing Emma's story and demanding justice. But while the legal system was handling Karen, I had one more battle left, the HOA board. We held an emergency community meeting that afternoon, the largest turnout in the neighborhood's history. Every seat was filled. People stood along the walls, some holding signs demanding new leadership, others clutching copies of the evidence. When I stepped onto the stage at the front, the room fell silent. This wasn't the police chief speaking now. It was a father, a neighbor, and a protector of a community that had been suffocated for years. This ends today, I said firmly. Every rule she twisted, every lie she spread, every family she threatened, no more. This neighborhood deserves safety, not fear. The board members who had supported Karen, 3 of them shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. But the residents were done protecting them. One mother stood up and shouted, You let her do this to our kids. Another man yelled, You watched her abuse families and stayed silent. The board members tried to defend themselves, offering excuses that fell flat in the face of community outrage. Then someone called for a vote of removal. And within 10 minutes, all 3 toxic board members were voted out, replaced, permanently removed from power. What happened next was something I'll never forget. The entire community, every neighbor, every family, every friend stood together in applause. Not for me, not for the police department, but for Emma, for justice, for reclaiming their home. When I returned to my sister's house that evening, Emma ran into my arms, her tiny legs trying their best despite her condition. She hugged me tight, burying her face into my chest. Daddy, is everything okay now? She whispered. I lifted her into my arms and held her like she was the most precious thing in the world, because she was, everything is okay now, sweetheart, and it's going to stay that way. The sun was setting behind us, casting soft golden light over her hair as she smiled. A real smile this time, not the frightened one she wore the day before. And in that moment, I knew something with absolute certainty. Evil had tried to break her, but love, truth, and justice had stood stronger. And together we won. Before the story ends, I want to speak directly to you, the person watching right now. If this father's fight for justice, if Emma's strength, if this entire community standing up against cruelty touched your heart even a little, then do one thing for me. Backhand index pointing right, drop your city in the comments. I want to know how far this message of courage and protection travels. And if you believe no child should ever be harmed, mocked, or silenced, then backhand index pointing right, hit that like button so this story reaches more people. Backhand index pointing right, subscribe to the channel for more real, emotional stories just like this. Your support doesn't just grow this channel, it helps keep stories like Emma's alive, stories that remind us that standing up, speaking out, and protecting those who can't protect themselves is what truly makes a community strong. Thank you for watching, and remember, justice is strongest when good people refuse to stay silent.